Welcome back to 7 Minute Tuesday. You're about to hear truth in just 7 minutes. We are talking about the apocalypse or the revelation of the last days. Now the Apostle John said, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one unto like the Son of Man. That's in Revelation chapter 1. You see, John knew the voice of his master, and he immediately turned in the direction when he heard Christ's voice. Now, I understand this in a very natural way. Last week, for instance, I was at the grocery store with my wife, and I began just drifting down the aisle, not paying attention to anything in particular, because my wife was taking her time reading the information on everything that she picked up. She reads expiration dates, sugar content, salt content, gluten-free this, gluten-free that, etc., etc. The place was busy, and I momentarily lost sight of her in the crowd, when suddenly I heard this voice behind me saying, "Neil." The sound was familiar. It was the voice of my wife, and I immediately turned around to see her smiling face and her grocery cart full of the things that she needed. Phew, I thought, now we can go home. When John turned and saw the Son of Man, he was in the midst of the 7 golden sticks, or the 7 churches. This incredible vision of Jesus was a statement in itself. It alone was enough for every believer to have faith and confidence in God to get them through personal trials, natural disasters, and even religious persecutions. John was on the Isle of Patmos. Rome had banished him there in order to try to silence his testimony of Christ. It was a time of excruciating loneliness for this apostle. Yet on Sunday, or the Lord's Day, he was in the Spirit and he heard that familiar voice of Jesus speaking to him. What John particularly noticed were the 7 aspects of Christ and his abiding presence in the midst of the church. These 7 attributes are always present when Christ is in your midst. When you paraphrase these 7 aspects of the vision, this is what John saw. God was revealed in the face of Jesus Christ, and now is presently walking amongst his church. He is the glorious light that shines in the midst of evil and the prevalent darkness. Christ judged sin once and for all through Jesus Christ on the cross, and no one can come under the condemnation of the devil again. Jesus' voice was the voice of all the nations and of every language in the world. It is he who holds every believer in the palms of his hand, just as the Father held and protected him. For our weaponry, he gave us a double-edged sword against Satan's attacks. Finally, the brilliance of his countenance is reflected by the power that is instantly available for everyone during their times of crisis. This imperativeness or this urgency of the vision was to keep Christ at the center of your life, at the center of the church, at the center of your worship. He must become the object of your faith. When John first heard Christ's voice, he immediately turned, and the Greek in that means to revert, change direction, convert, return, or to be engaged with the one who was speaking. The dual action was to hear and to turn. And you do this today by turning in your heart towards Christ. It is the turning to Christ that you find your strength and grace in times of need. When Moses saw the burning bush, he said, "I will now turn aside and see this great sight, and why this bush is not burnt." And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, that's when God spoke to him. And you can read all about this in Exodus chapter 3. When God spoke to Moses, he revealed himself as the I am that I am. Or it really literally meant, I will be whom I will be. In other words, Moses, when you stand before Pharaoh, I will be to Pharaoh an enemy, but to you I will be a deliverer. Moses was to hear what God was saying, to receive it, believe it, and then act in accordance with it. One of the great dangers of the church that the church faces today is becoming dull in its hearing of the word. 7 times the Spirit says, "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches." In the Hebrew epistle, the writer says it this way: "Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the day of the provocation." Hebrews chapter 3. God gave them a choice. If you will hear and don't harden your hearts, then God would be there to be a deliverer for them. But if they did harden their hearts, it would result in an evil heart of unbelief, causing many to perish. Families today are destroyed when there is a reluctance to serve God from the heart. Now, becoming dull in hearing doesn't happen overnight, beloved. And here's a simple illustration from raising children. Dullness begins when your child hears your voice but chooses not to listen to you. Then you raise your voice a few decibels, and when there is still no response, then you raise your voice even higher. Finally, in desperation, you're screaming at the top of your lungs, threatening all kinds of bad things, and then suddenly there is a reaction. You see, beloved, this was not what God intended for his children. He did not want an apocalypse to be his voice. He wanted you to hear him through his word before the crisis. This way you could have faith in him, and that he would deliver you by his mighty, powerful hand. That's why John begins with this vision by saying, "Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of the prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein," because John knew the time of difficulties was at hand. I trust this has blessed you today. Keep in touch. See you next week. God bless.